Welcome to meeting number 27 of the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage. Before we begin, I'd ask you to read the guidelines written on the updated cards on your table. They are measures in place to help prevent feedback incidents and protect the health and safety of all participants, including our interpreters. You will notice there's a QR code on the card which links to a short awareness video if you need more information. Please wait until I recognize you by name before you speak. All comments should be addressed through the chair. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, September 22nd, 2025, the committee is meeting to study the state of the journalism and media sectors. And it looks like we have a big panel here today, but it's 4 organizations. We have, as an individual, Marie-Yves Carignan, professeur titulaire,
full professor, UNESCO Chair in the Prevention of Violent Radicalization and Extremism. University of Sherbrooke.
Full professor. We have the Aboriginal Peoples Television Network, Cheryl McKenzie, Executive Director, Mike Omelis, Executive Director of Content and Programming, and Joel Fortune, Legal Counsel. Welcome. We also have Accessible Media with us today, David Arrington, President and CEO, and Kevin Goldstein, Outside Regulatory Counsel. And we have the Canadian Ethnic Media Association, Quima Rezvanifar, President, and Madeleine Ziniak, Chair. Please correct me on the pronunciation of your names. If I've butchered them, I apologize. You will each collectively, as an organization, have 5 minutes for an opening statement, and then we'll invite questions from members. So we'll start. On va commencer avec.
We will begin with Marie-Yves Carignan. You have 5 minutes starting now. Thank you. Microphone, please. Okay. Thank you for inviting me today. A few words about myself and why I'm speaking to you today. I've been head of communications and analysis at the Quebec Press Council for 7 years. It's the Quebec's media self-regulatory body, the Press Tribunal. I've looked at journalistic practices and media ethics. For about 12 years, I've been a full professor of journalism and public information at the University of Sherbrooke. So my research focuses on journalistic practices, media ethics, the impact of the media on society, and disinformation. Today I wanted to talk to you about media as a public good with a corresponding responsibility. So the importance of media: they must be considered a public good since they are not businesses like any other due to their essential role to democracy and in serving the public. So everybody can benefit from them, and therefore there needs to be public intervention to fund them. In light of this, measures that ensure their financial sustainability, as already adopted by the Canadian government, must be maintained and strengthened because, as you know, there's a steady decline in traditional advertising revenues, a drop of $6 billion since 2008 toward big American digital platforms. Measures such as the Online News Act are essential to the survival of media. They need to be strengthened, and countries would benefit from working together to adopt common measures and maybe to have a greater weight facing these web giants. The Canadian Journalism Labour Tax Credit must also be maintained and strengthened, in my view. It is important to fund journalism, which has great added value for the public, particularly factual journalism, investigative journalism, and science journalism. Measures must also be adopted to promote local media because of their importance. There is cause for concern about certain news deserts where local news and municipal political coverage are non-existent. Large regions, including in Quebec, are covered by a single media outlet and sometimes by a single journalist. Sometimes these are vast geographic areas. For example, for the importance of local media, our research on the Lac-Mégantic rail tragedy demonstrated the crucial role played by local media in crisis situations. In the context of this crisis, local radio was essential for the public to allow them to know what public health measures to take. This was not something available to them in national media. The people could see what they needed to do by looking to local media, notably local radio. It's therefore necessary to fund this media to have tax measures for them. In a report that our team submitted in 2023 to the Quebec Ministry of Culture and Communications, we also demonstrated the essential role of Indigenous media in serving these communities. These communities feel underrepresented in the national media. Indigenous media face pressing challenges in terms of human and material resources and training for professional journalists. They need recurring funding. Project-based funding is particularly restrictive and ill-suited to their situation, and a better structure for generating advertising revenue, including government advertising. A number of the people we spoke to during this study explained how much government advertising has saved their media during the COVID-19 pandemic. It was essential for them. A number of them would have shut down otherwise. A public good, like media, also implies social responsibility for the media. In a context of rising misinformation and where the Canadian public still gets a lot of its news from social media, and despite Meta's blocking of news media, the results of the Digital News Report 2025 show that a majority of Canadians still get news from Facebook. Nearly a quarter of Canadians. It's very concerning. It's important to offer the public a variety of sources of information so they can find accurate information online. The results of another survey we conducted during the pandemic showed that audiences sometimes had emotional expectations of the media during crises. Sometimes they're accused of being too critical or not critical enough, or covering the crisis like freezing rain too much when fatigue sets in. Sometimes media bias is perceived when it's more about the crisis and uncertainty. Still, the blurring of journalistic genres between information and opinion also fuels this mistrust. Another survey conducted with my colleague Marc-François Bernier in 2023 showed that while the majority of respondents believe that events happened as reported by the media, many have doubts about the independence of journalists and the media between politics and the economy. This is why media accountability is so important. If the media is a public good, it must put structures in place to demonstrate that it meets ethical standards and ensure that it is accountable to the public. The public needs transparency and to be better informed about journalistic practices. Media literacy and education about diverse sources of information are also essential, especially in the context of the rise of AI and deepfakes. Investing in the training of journalists, particularly those working in community media, and providing them with the resources to develop the digital and technological tools necessary for their discoverability and survival is essential. Pooling these resources would be an opportunity for these media outlets. In short, in a world in crisis and faced with a rise in disinformation and biased sources, it is important to present the media as a public good, which must be funded accordingly, but which must also be accountable for its actions, given its social responsibility. Thank you.
Merci à vous.
Thank you.
Next, we will go to Aboriginal Peoples Television Network. Collectively, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting us to appear today. APTN News brings Indigenous perspectives to Canada's national conversation, and we do it to the highest professional journalistic standards. From day one, we have ensured journalistic independence and editorial integrity. Those uncompromising principles were established by the late and renowned news director Dan David when APTN News was first built, and they continue to guide how we operate today. Our journalists follow the same rigorous standards you would expect from any major news organization in Canada. But what makes APTN different is Indigenous perspectives. We cover stories you won't see anywhere else, which make up much of our reporting, but also the national and global stories every network is covering. APTN invests heavily in journalism. We operate bureaus across the country and send reporters wherever the story requires, even when that travel is difficult and expensive. Recently, our journalists traveled to Greenland to report on the Inuit perspective regarding threats of a U.S. takeover. We also travel throughout Canada into many remote communities. We recently traveled to Resolute Bay and Grise Fiord to report on the changing way of life due to melting sea ice. This kind of reporting takes time and resources. While many television news reports today run under 90 seconds, APTN stories often run 3 or 4 minutes, sometimes longer. That time matters. It allows our journalists to explain the story, include community voices, and report the full story. Because First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities are complex. APTN produces one of the few remaining standalone investigative news programs in Canada. Our journalism has received national recognition, including Canada's most prestigious journalist honor, the Michener Award. But the most important measure is the trust that we work for with our communities. No other media outlet in Canada can match the volume and breadth of Indigenous news coverage that APTN accomplishes. As Indigenous peoples, we are the ones who need to be telling our own stories. I'll now turn things over to my colleague, Mike Omlis.
Thank you, Cheryl. Et bonjour tout le monde. Canada's media system is under real pressure, and the alarm bells are already ringing. Le système canadien de radiodiffusion traverse une période extrêmement.
The Canadian broadcasting system is going through a very difficult period. The changes to the media market threaten the capacity of Canadian broadcasters to continue producing journalism shows and others that reflect our country. The fundamental issue is the following. Will Canada still have media institutions that are necessary to tell its own stories?
APTN relies primarily on our subscriber fee and advertising revenue to operate, but all of this is at risk. The broadcasting ecosystem is being reshaped by global streaming platforms. They operate widely in Canada and make billions in revenue, but they don't yet make nearly the same level of contribution to the Canadian system that we expect from Canadian broadcasters. This is not sustainable for the Canadian system and for Canadian broadcast media. That's why APTN has proposed that the CRTC establish a Services of Exceptional Importance Fund designed to support broadcasters that provide essential public value to Canadians. This and other measures are necessary for Canadians and Canadian stories to have a meaningful presence online. Indigenous journalism, storytelling, language preservation, it all depends on a healthy Canadian broadcasting system, and we believe so does journalistic integrity. You can't protect journalistic integrity if the newsroom disappears. It's time for all hands on deck. Media organizations and newsrooms across Canada are at risk of disappearing, and APTN is no exception. Merci, nous serons.
Thank you. We will be pleased to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Cheryl. I would have loved to have 3 or 4 minutes to tell a news story back in my day. You're right. They're 90 seconds to 2 minutes. Accessible Media is next. David Arrington and Kevin Goldstein. You have 5 minutes, starting now.
Good morning, and thank you. Accessible Media Inc., AMI, would like to thank the committee for the opportunity to appear before you this morning to offer its views on the state of the media industry in Canada. My name is David Arrington. I am President and CEO. With me today is Kevin Goldstein of Goldstein Communications Law, AMI's outside regulatory counsel. AMI is a Canadian content company that entertains, informs, and empowers persons with disabilities through the offering of original content that reflects diversity and inclusion. AMI operates 3 broadcast services, AMI TV, AMI Audio in English, and AMI Tele in French. Each of these services benefits from a mandatory carriage order from the CRTC, which requires Canada's cable and satellite companies to distribute AMI services to all their subscribers and to pay AMI a monthly fee per subscriber set by the Commission. AMI's vision is to establish and support a voice for the 1 in 4 Canadians with a disability, representing their interests, concerns, and values through accessible media, reflection, and portrayal. This study comes at a critical time for the Canadian media sector. For well over a decade, the Canadian broadcasting system has been undergoing a significant structural change driven by the emergence of foreign-owned internet streaming platforms such as Netflix, Prime Video, and Disney+, and related declines in subscriptions to traditional cable, IPTV, or satellite providers. AMI services and other public interest channels like them play a very important role in the Canadian broadcasting system and make immeasurable contributions to the communities that they serve. Together, we form a cornerstone of Canada's democratic, cultural, linguistic, and accessible ecosystems, bringing trusted public interest programming to Canadians in every region of the country. However, it is important to recognize that these channels are directed at niche audiences that would not exist without regulatory intervention. Historically, these revenues have come almost entirely from monthly subscriber fees that cable, IPTV, and satellite companies pay. As subscribers to these distributors have cut the cord and migrated towards streaming providers, it has had a dramatic impact on public interest broadcasters like AMI, putting their ongoing viability at risk. Compounding the problem is that CRTC has generally been unwilling to consider changes to the rates broadcast distributors pay to public interest services except as part of a formal license renewal process. License renewals are supposed to occur every 5 years, but given the recent overhaul of the Broadcasting Act and the CRTC's efforts to revise its regulatory framework as a result, license renewals for these channels are now unlikely to occur before 2027, a full 9 years after the last renewals were considered. Moreover, AMI's television services have actually never had a rate increase in their nearly 2 decades of existence. AMI's annual revenues are now well over $4 million less than they were when AMI's license was last renewed in 2018 and continue to decline. This financial reality has forced AMI to restructure its operations, reduce its workforce, and shift the ways in which it produces programming. But this is only a temporary fix. While increasing the rates broadcast distributors pay by a reasonable amount is part of the solution, we respectfully submit that a more comprehensive approach is needed. The CRTC is currently considering what financial contributions streaming platforms should make to the system, and AMI and others have argued that a portion of such expenditures must go to support public interest channels, something that is now specifically contemplated under the Broadcasting Act. Furthermore, in 2024, the government committed $10 million over 2 years to help address funding shortfalls for public interest services. This funding was recently renewed for an additional 2 years, but at a lower amount. While we truly appreciate this funding, it is far from enough. Over the next 3 years, the public interest services that are eligible to tap into these funds expect to face a funding shortfall of more than $38 million. What we desperately need is reliable, sustainable funding. This involves a dedicated envelope of funds from the federal government for an extended period of time and at a level substantially greater than $10 million. This, coupled with increased funding from broadcast distributors and required contributions from streaming platforms, will help stabilize the operations of public interest channels for the long term. Without such support, however, the viability of our channels and our ability to deliver on the mandates is in serious doubt. AMI would like to thank the committee for the opportunity to provide these comments, and we would be pleased to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Canadian Ethnic Media Association, you have 5 minutes.
Good morning, Madam Chair and committee members. On behalf of the Canadian Ethnic Media Association, we would like to thank you for the opportunity to appear before the House of Commons Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage for Study of Journalism and Media Sector. I am Kiumars Rezvanifar, a president of the Canadian Ethnic Media Association, and also for the last 33 years, an independent television producer for the Iranian communities in Canada. With me is Ms. Madeleine Zignac, chair of the Canadian Ethnic Media Association and the recipient of the Order of Canada for her work in multilingual and multicultural media. The Canadian Ethnic Media Association, CIMA, was founded in 1978 and is a not-for-profit volunteer-based organization whose membership of journalists, producers, writers from all media platforms serves as a voice for Canada's diverse ethnic media sector. For the past 48 years, CIMA, as a part of its mandate, has supported the principle of Canadian citizenship, multiculturalism, and the right of free expression without ethnocentric bias. And CIMA has also annually produced juried national awards of journalistic excellence in order to recognize, inspire, and platform the exceptional work and talent in Canada's ethnic media. We are here today to address serious issues facing the independent multilingual community television producers sector in Canada. Our media platforms, reaching millions of weekly viewers, targets underserved communities across Canada, whose language of comfort is neither English nor French. This is to inform you that this is the only Canadian media sector without any dedicated federal support, despite being essential to trusted multilingual communication and outreach. Unfortunately, in spite of statements made by government representatives, none of the independent multilingual television community producers have any access to any funding, specifically the Canada Media Fund, the Google News Fund, the Local Journalism Initiative, Canadian Journalism Labor Tax Credit. In fact, the criteria for all these funds are prohibitive and punitive to the independent ethnic community producer sector. Now I will ask Ms. Madenzina to continue with your presentation.
Thank you, Q. Mars. There is a critical need for an equitable playing field for independent ethnic community producers that is commensurate with Canada's multilingual population. The described landscape has resulted in the demise of many Canadian multilingual media platforms. This challenging environment continues to threaten the fragile multicultural media sector due to systemic exclusion to any existing government-supported funding. This sector not only reflects the multicultural, ethnocultural identity of Canada, but also acts as a conduit for crucial, trusted communication, inclusive of government outreach. A pertinent example to cite is during the COVID-19 lockdowns, we provided vital health information to diverse audiences in their mother tongue, who otherwise may not have had access to critical life-saving information. It is also important to note that this media sector, without access to funding structures and Canadian government support, could become vulnerable to foreign influence and disinformation, contributing to a potential risk of national security. According to Statistics Canada, 1 in 4 Canadians speak a language at home other than French or English. The revised Broadcasting Act mandates support in the production and broadcasting of programs in a diversity of languages. We need to be able to contribute to the development and sustainability of a more inclusive Canadian media environment. Canadian Ethnic Media Association has been in discussions for years with relevant levels of government, identifying our issues and proposing recommendations. It is in this spirit today that we welcome this opportunity to present the issues concerning the Canadian independent ethnic community producer sector. We are Canada. Merci, Megwech, Basapas, Dziakuyu. Thank you, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you all for your very succinct and pointed opening statements. Excellent. I will now turn to Mrs. Thomas. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you. Sure. I think my first question is for ethnic media. And my question is this. In your opening remarks, you said that without the right support for ethnic media to continue to exist in Canada, it makes those that are a part of different ethnic communities here in our country perhaps vulnerable to misinformation or disinformation. It also makes them vulnerable to foreign influence. My hope is that you can just take a minute and expand on that vulnerability that exists there.
I'll begin to answer that and pass it over to Q, who has a real-life experience of what is really going on. I think without support from Canada, what occurs is you have ethnic media that is often a volunteer situation or one that has to be subsidized by other businesses in order to continue their television programming and production of ethnic media. There are many occasions that have been cited where foreign governments have come forward and said, you know, we will support your media entity. However, if we do so, financially, you will have to maybe include some of this editorial. So many independent producers, Q being one of them, have refused this support based on the information that they would have to carry, which is not through a Canadian perspective, especially at this time of polarized environments. I think we're living through a time which is extremely challenging, certainly for ethnocultural communities. They are dedicated to a Canadian ethnocultural perspective. They are the thread that are binding communities in Canada, and a voice that is trusted and in mother tongue. It's very important to get accurate information. Often those whose language is not French or English have a problem in interpreting distinctly the information that comes forward. Now I'll ask Q to give his own life experience of the situation.
Well, I think it's about last year, I was approached by CBC I guess there was a study done by the government, and they found out the foreign influence is another issue for the national security. And for that matter, 33 years ago when I started my program, and I was not that known. So I was approached by the government of Iran, and because I started the business and it was everything, and in 3 different times, they approached me, and they wanted to help me. And the funny thing was that they were telling me that I'm having the same mandate that they are having, which is to promote the culture, promote everything. But we are smarter than that. We know what's going to happen. And in 3 different times, I refused. The reason I refused, that's why I'm here now. And for that matter, I'm aware of variety and several media outlets that they fell into that trap. And they don't exist anymore, to tell you that. But for that matter, yes, there's a price to pay if you are going that route.
So I find that interesting that you were able to stand up against the Iranian regime and not accept their funding. Thank you for standing for truth. Interestingly enough, just in January of this year, Iranian protesters gathered outside of CBC Radio Canada, demanding more objective coverage for what was happening in Iran, for what is happening in Iran. And they said one of the things that they were advocating for, a direct quote, is they said, CBC, tell the truth. And so a media outlet like yours is committed to telling the truth. Why is that so important in an environment where that doesn't seem to be the case, even from our main media outlets in this country?
Madam Chair, I respond that. In that matter, you're absolutely, we are fighting that. In fact, what has happened for past 2 months received a total media blackout, from all levels, not only media, even the human rights advocates. I remember I'm part of that organization behind the scene to organize all these rallies and everything else, and we have created a kind of brand for ourselves. I remember one of them, I believe 150,000 people at downtown Toronto, and we received it from one of the media at only 20-second exposure. And it seems like every day that thing happens, So itself is news, if you want to cover it. And for us, we heard that there are some pro-different, I don't want to name, but there's certain mentality and views in that organization that led them to not give us the coverage. That's what the whole community. It's not that often that we go to a broadcaster and demand that, but it's been so obvious, so clear that this is news that has been covered all over the world, in every aspect. And our main broadcaster tries to look the other way, or at least doesn't give it that attention that it deserves for the Canadians, not only just for us, for all the Canadians. Because right now we are not living in a global village, we live in a global neighborhood. Everything happens anywhere, affects us right now. So, for example, it was kind of sad and it was kind of disappointing that we rely on that organization to give us our story and let other Canadians know. We've been educating Canadians of what's going on because I think, unfortunately, they are not getting the real truth. We should be getting it from the, let's say, CBC.
If I may add also that I think, the ethnic media sector is dedicated, to contribute to democracy in Canada. Many of the communities are here because of that. And as we live in a more turbulent world, we know that democracy is being whittled away. And I think it's so important to have a Canadian ethnocultural perspective in news, reflection of the community dynamics and support that is there. So I think in this increasing world of polarization, it's very important to have this binding thread in media in the language of your comfort, and specifically the independent ethnic producer segment, which, as we said, is would really appreciate being able to have some kind of support. It's a distinct category and has not been to date recognized in the broadcasting arena as far as support.
Mr. Al-Sood, do you have 6 minutes?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for being with us today. A healthy media ecosystem is one where everyone can see themselves reflected in the stories being told. Everyone deserves access to news. My first question will be for APTN, Ms. McKenzie, Mr. Omelis, Mr. Fortune. Thank you for being with us, of course. Indigenous media organizations play a unique and vital role in Canada's media ecosystem. They ensure Indigenous voices are heard, stories are told authentically, and communities, particularly in remote regions, have access to culturally relevant journalism. Ms. McKenzie, you said, as Indigenous peoples, we are the ones who should be telling our own stories. In your experience, what kinds of stories or perspectives are most often missed when Indigenous journalism is absent from the media landscape?
That real lived experience in the communities by the people doing the work in journalism. Oftentimes let me rephrase that. If you can spend your whole day doing something that you're absolutely dedicated to and so passionate about, and you put the research in and you do the work and you present that, and then you go home for the day, and all of your subject matter that you've just done that entire day has no impact on your family. You don't think about it. It doesn't affect your life. You're not thinking about your weekend plans. It's not affecting your ability to go to work the next day because of things happening in your family. I think that having Indigenous journalists doing Indigenous journalism, you'll get that deeper context that headlines and those shorter stories are just not able to get to.
It's interesting, this idea of reflected experience finding itself on those spaces where others can in turn that into reflected experience. APTN plays a critical role in ensuring Indigenous communities see themselves reflected in national media. What are the biggest structural challenges Indigenous broadcasters face in reaching audiences today?
It absolutely has to be about the resources to do it. APTN, we get our money primarily from cable subscriptions, and we all know the direction of cable subscriptions and where that's going. It means decreased revenue year after year for broadcasters like APTN. We also have rating systems in Canada that are not truly capturing the audience that actually watches APTN. It's focused a lot in the south, southern communities. There's barely any measure. I know there are work to change the way that television consumption, if you could say, to measure that, to capture those true audiences for us, but it's just not happening fast enough. It affects our bottom line, our revenue when it comes to marketing. Everyone looks at those ratings numbers and says, oh, well, sorry, can't help you there, even though it's not a true reflection. We have done more with less over the years, in recent years especially. We absolutely have to be on the digital scene, and I'm very proud of the work that our staff does. They just go ahead and charge forward, and they just have so many ideas, and they get that out there. So we do our television broadcasts. They get everything onto digital. We just relaunched our new news app. It was down for a little while because of the upgrading, but you can find that now today. I could go on and on, but I think maybe I should leave it there for your questions.
If I may elaborate just on the rating system, I mean, there are many structural issues. Ratings is just one of them. Numeris is the primary currency that advertisers and major broadcasters use to determine audiences. There is no measurement or very little measurement in rural areas. There is no measurement in any of the 3 territories. There is no measurement off of satellite. And that has a huge impact on our audience numbers through the regular system that is being used. There is some experimentation with set-top box data that has been underway for at least a dozen years. And preliminary testing shows an increase of well over 30% in APTN's ratings. So that just says the current system is flawed. It's one of the issues we face.
Fantastic. Thank you both. This is actually a perfect segue into my next question on the cable subscriptions piece. This committee has consistently taken an interest in this shift, this technological advancements angle, because it has such an important kind of impact on the industry at large. As audiences increasingly consume media through digital platforms and streaming services, I'm curious if you could maybe provide a little more context on what kind of progress or what kind of pathways you folks have endeavored into the digital world, but also what policies or supports you find would be most helpful in helping you pursue that transition.
Absolutely. We have monetized our YouTube channel. Definitely using Google, we put our content out on multiple platforms every single day. We've diverged into podcasts because we know there's a lot of podcast uptake. We do multiple live streams, including many events like Not This Committee. I told them Not This Committee. I'm just kidding. I didn't say that. We definitely like the big major news events. You know, we buy into those pool feeds for broadcasters, so we can provide a forum for our own audiences to watch on their network and discuss in the comments forum what is happening. We broadcast live our news twice a day, and we also live stream those things. Even our own news team is helping APTN become more and more on the digital scene, because we are a small but mighty team. So we all have to stick together and try and do it as much as we can, and everybody certainly does that.
Thank you. The time's up for that question, actually. But Mr. Omulus, I wanted to ask you to clarify. In your opening statement, you suggested that the government implement a system for services of exceptional. I didn't get the last. What did you say? Exactly?
Services of exceptional importance.
Importance. Okay.
Importance. What APTN does is unique.
I'm not going to ask you to go into detail
Okay.
right now. Maybe other members will have to, but I thought that was an important suggestion. I wanted to make sure I got it right.
Thank you.
Et maintenant, je donne la parole à Monsieur.
Now, the floor goes to Mr. Champoux for 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Carignan, welcome back to this committee. It's always very interesting to have you with us. The current study is to shed light on the state of the journalism and media sectors. In your view, is journalism in good shape today? Journalism is in a pretty critical state. I see it as a professor of journalism. Many students hesitate to go into journalism because of the precarious conditions, the income they might not get. There are freelance journalists, but their main income is another job, and journalism might be their aspiration, but it's not enough to pay the bills. So journalism is a career that's in jeopardy. Even though many students like it, there's a lot of fears, especially with the rise of AI. They fear the loss of jobs and positions. We've talked about the career of journalism, but the quality of journalism coverage today. You've been teaching at the University of Sherbrooke for 12 years. Have you seen a difference over the last decade in the quality of journalism? And in your view, what influences those changes in the result of the work of journalism in Quebec and Canada? Many factors, I imagine. Of course, the quality of journalism, I think the majority of journalists still want to do great work. They care about it. People become journalists because they care about it. They're very dedicated. They want to do good work. However, what we've seen in the last 15, 20 years I've been looking at journalism is that there's a lot more opinion journalism. We can understand it. It's lucrative. It's less expensive to produce than investigative reporting. It attracts a lot of people, but that journalism can often mislead people because people have a difficult time making the distinction between factual and opinion journalism, and that journalism might add less knowledge for understanding social issues. When I was talking about the importance of funding investigative journalism and specialized journalism, I think that accompanies that comment on opinion journalism. And there's the crisis in media. We've talked about specialized media, ethnic media, local media, they face a lot of difficulties in funding. Fewer and fewer people want to work at the community level because it's not lucrative. It's like believing in a cause and investing yourself. Community media have lost a lot of resources. In Quebec, there's a lot of competition among regional media. So a lot of places have lost their weekly media because of the competition with Québécois. I want to pick up on the nuance between opinion journalism and factual journalism, the vocation of journalism, which is really to find the facts, tell the story the closest as possible to the truth. Nothing is perfect, we know, but the arrival of opinion journalism and that approach, independent media specialize sometimes in opinion journalism. But that means that major media, traditional media, have also taken up that practice of also offering columns and commentary. Do you think that major media have made a mistake by not making a clear enough distinction for their readers between columns and commentary and what is in their truly factual, serious journalism? I think there's a lack of distinction. A lot of people are misled. That's what we've seen in our studies and other studies. People don't always make a distinction between opinion and information. There's confusion, and that leads to mistrust in the media. Those distinctions need to be clearer. We see trends. There's opinion journalism rising in the U.S. There are very popular figures, and so there's popularity of opinion journalism. And then who's a journalist, who isn't? A lot of people online say they're journalists, but they have ideological biases. That's very concerning. And I talked about journalistic accountability in my opening remarks. It's a problem we've seen recently. I've been to a number of conferences on journalism, and columnists and commentators said they didn't have to have media ethics because they weren't engaging in factual journalism, but that's a major mistake. Opinion journalists have the same rules as factual journalism. They just are able to give their opinion, but the reports need to be based on factual information, and there's a lot more flexibility given to opinion journalists. What do you think of the fact that more and more groups and individuals present themselves as watchdogs of journalism coverage? We had a group, Honest Reporting, earlier this week. What do you think of these groups that target people based on their opinions on certain issues? They will criticize everything that isn't to their liking in journalism with very little nuance. We've seen it more and more in the current ecosystem. Does that have an impact on the work of journalists, on their courage in doing their work in a serious way? Thank you for the question. It's an excellent question. The groups that are defending interests are important. It's important to stand for representation in different situations, to have full reporting that shows the two sides in conflicts or different situations. What I find difficult about groups like Honest Reporting Canada is their approach. They do doxing. They intimidate journalists. They target specific journalists. It's not just those interest groups. On social media, we see people. There are a number of studies that show that journalists are targeted by hateful messages, bullying. Their address is published and the address of their families. People don't become journalists because they fear for their safety and that of their families, and it's not always something that pays well. Why do it if you're threatened? And then there are also experts who speak in the media. I could talk a long time about this. My team that works on misinformation, we've received threats. We've had to strengthen security at the university, so there's intimidation and people don't dare to speak publicly. We have to defend different points of view, but do it honestly and with respect, and using structures that are already in place. Yes, thank you. It's possible to speak publicly without intimidation. Now I give the floor to Mr. Généreux for 5 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to all of the witnesses. It's very interesting. Mr. Amalus, I have a question for you. You speak French well. The Government of Canada has an agreement with Google, $100 million a year. But Radio-Canada, of that 100 million, receives 7 million because they have journalists. And based on the agreement, it's on those important points, the number of journalists they have in each media to receive funding. Do you find that the fact that the government or the Canadian people pay $1.4 billion to CBC Radio-Canada to do their work, do you think it's logical that it also receive the $7 million, even they have journalists, but all of these media outlets like yours could potentially obtain more funding for your journalists if that $7 million weren't there? $7 million, well, $6 billion have been siphoned away, but $7 million could look like peanuts, but this is going to an organization that already receives $1.4 billion to do its work. Do you think it would be logical for that money from Google go towards organizations like yours?
Merci, monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Généreux. $7 million is not peanuts for APTN, of course. I'd like to express myself in English just to be accurate.
We have a great partnership with CBC and Radio-Canada. We have a memorandum of understanding, and we could not do some of the work that we do, especially scripted dramas, without their support. They have been very, very supportive. It's a really complex issue, who is eligible for additional funding coming into the system. We benefit from some Google money because of the journalism that we do. But I think it's something that, you know, the regulators need to be seized with and decide what is the best way to spend the money. And should it go to an organization that is already funded by the government to the tune of $1.4 billion, that's really not something for us to comment on. But I do want to express our gratitude to Canadian Heritage for the gap funding that we did receive. I think APTN received $2.5 million. And that is very, very helpful. It's interim, it's short term, as the CRTC works through the updating of the Broadcasting Act, but we are grateful for that support. I wanted to mention that.
I don't want to give judgment on who receives and who doesn't, but the idea is that when there's a public organization that receives over $1 billion to do its work, okay, but the agreement with Google, it was supposed to be had with other partners. That didn't happen. But the agreement with Google, those agreements were supposed to bring in much more than $100 million. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. And the question is for you, but also to Ms. Carignan. Those sums of money, should we continue trying to obtain them so that we can help Canadian journalism? Because inevitably, I think that in light of what we see today, the big platforms are taking up a lot of the media space. How can we get more money from them? If I may, thank you for the question. In fact, I think those amounts should be given to different media. Official language minority communities, ethnic media, community media should receive their share, just like big national media, because we need a diversity of sources of information. Sometimes in the comments, I hear concerns about biased information. Well, we need to have a number of sources to have a variety of information. They all need to be funded. And the agreement with Google is important, but the government needs to continue seeing how we can ask the other platforms to be accountable. Maybe a solution would be to obtain more funding. And I think we need to try to discuss with other countries how they can also apply pressure on platforms. Canada alone might not be a big enough player, but if we can work together among different countries to put pressure on the big platforms, we won't be threatened to have access to social media cut off because we're a small player. We need to work together to put pressure on big platforms so they would give funding. There have been agreements with Australia or elsewhere in the world. Do you have examples that you could provide that, in your view, have worked better than what we've had in Canada? $100 million is not nothing, but the expectations of the government were much higher. Quickly, please, because we're out of time. The government was expecting more. We need to continue applying pressure. There are examples in Great Britain, in Europe, in Australia that show that it can work. We need to continue applying pressure. And sometimes when we don't give in, the platforms do. And so we need to take inspiration from that.
Merci.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Tumba for 5 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. When I arrived in Canada, I had a dream to be a journalist because I was a journalist, a written journalist in my country. When I arrived here, I faced challenges. I turned to other careers and I was better able to integrate, and now I'm an MP. I'm not going to complain about that. But I have a question for Ms. Carignan. Should we look at or broaden the frame of journalism and perhaps create a guild for journalists? That's a major question. I know that in the journalism community there are 2 points of view. Some think that a type of guild could create protection, give status to journalists, and so that people who don't respect media ethics and claim to be journalists, and while there could be a seal of credibility for people because there's a crisis in confidence now, but other journalists are concerned about a structure that could prevent journalists from freely doing their work, because freedom of the press and freedom of expression are fundamental freedoms, and there's no mandatory training for journalism, so people could study in any area and then become a journalist, and so that's an issue in how the guild would work. I think we can find a compromise. People who practice journalism now could be under a body that would respect certain ethical rules, and we could increase confidence. I'm very concerned now about people who claim to be journalists on social media and who clearly don't respect any rules or journalistic practices, any rigorous standards. And that's important because it creates confusion and it leads to mistrust in all sources of information, including professional ones. Thank you. Mr. Omelus, earlier you mentioned ratings for media. But regarding ratings, measuring them, could you share what solutions you would suggest to have credible ratings? The system now is very complicated to determine ratings, but it needs to be consistent across the regions of Canada. It's unacceptable, in my view, that there isn't a measure in the territories of Canada. People who have satellite TV, for example. In English, if I may.
Really necessary to have proper ratings to know who is watching, where they're watching, what are they watching, and we don't have that system that exists right now. There's inégalité. I think also we need to get into discoverability of content. There's a big issue on my TV remote. I have Samsung TV. I can get Disney Plus, Netflix, Amazon Prime. Où est Canada? Canada's not there. That's a big issue. I think Joel wants to add something.
Yeah, looking forward as well. Excuse me. The data obviously is people have said it's the new oil. So fair access to data from streaming platforms and digital service is going to be increasingly important. Now we're only getting into these days into how the online world is going to be structured and regulated in the public interest in Canada, but obviously access to data is going to be critical for Canadian media to understand their audiences and to perform better in the market. Ultimately, the market is important for success or failure of all media, so you have to have fair access to underlying data, respecting privacy at all times, of course, but you need to have that data access.
Monsieur, Monsieur Errington.
Mr. Arrington, how do you view the effectiveness of existing federal programs to support inclusive media? In your view, are there additional measures that could be particularly helpful to guarantee the accessibility of information in Canada?
Thank you for that question. I think from AMI's perspective, the thing that makes us unique and makes us unique in the Canadian broadcasting system is the fact that no other network like ours exists in the world where we're providing accessible content with respect to captioning, with respect to description. We're looking at adding ASL and QSL to our content going forward. So from a accessibility standpoint, Canada is a leader in that throughout the world with respect to that. And I think AMI has played a critical role in putting that out there and making sure that content in Canada is accessible. I think our lobbying efforts, when I first started in 2009 with AMI TV, and we later added to AMI Tele in 2014, the lobbying and the fact that now that all content in primetime has to have description, I don't think that would have happened without the lobbying efforts and advocacies and things that we did at AMI TV. So from an accessibility standpoint, Canada is a leader. And I think it's a leader because we have networks like AMI to promote that and foster that. What is needed, and you're going to hear that over and over and over again, is long-term sustainable funding so that we can continue to do the things that we do really well. You know, AMI is a leader with respect to accessibility of content, but we're also a leader in accessible content. We create over 100 hours of original content per year, half and half between English and French. It's award-winning content that is being recognized throughout Canada. And in order for us to continue to do that in the future, we need long-term sustainable funding from government, from cable, and from the Streaming Act. Those three mechanisms will help us. Thank you.
Je passe maintenant à Monsieur.
Now to Mr. Champoux for 2.5 minutes. That was very interesting. Mr. Omelas was talking about discoverability. We've talked about data. This is a challenge, I think, for all Quebec and Canadian media outlets, that discoverability. That was a subject of a number of studies, and we've heard it in Quebec as well. It's a major concern. Are there limits, however, to what we can do in terms of discoverability? Madame Carignan, there was the news that garnered a lot of attention. Radio-Canada decided to send a Prime Video, owned by Amazon, one of the big American platforms, which refuses to respect tax or regulatory rules for broadcasting. As an observer, and as objectively as possible, what do you think of a decision like that by Radio-Canada to offer content and programming on an American platform before it offers it on its own platform, 2.tv, as is the case for CBC News Network, which is available on GEM? I'd like to know if I'm mistaken in thinking that it doesn't make any sense. Thank you for the question. I always try to present the different points of view as an expert. I know that the committee has called for Radio-Canada to present its position on this. I think that will be very interesting and important to do so. I think that's a good initiative. From what I understand, there are economic imperatives behind this decision. All media, even national media, which may have privileges others don't, but it's really about the money. The challenge is everywhere. RDI is an important channel, but broadcasting subscriptions are decreasing. There's a situation that explains the decision to go through something that's not 2.tv because the agreement with the broadcasters doesn't allow it to be made available for a fee on 2.tv. But I have big questions about the choice of Amazon Prime. It's not necessarily exemplary in its practices with labor or in Quebec, and in the discoverability of Canadian and Quebec content. I think those platforms need to do a lot more to make our content more discoverable, to open the door to Canadian media. I have a hard time understanding the choice to use Amazon Prime as a public broadcaster. Once the foundation is solid here, we could go find ways to reach more people. I think that is a goal, but I think it's questionable to say that the first thing to do will be to go to that platform. There are Quebec and Canadian platforms owned here that could have offered that service. Doesn't this go against the ethics that the public broadcaster should have to lead by example in its practices? I agree with you. Microphone, please. The Canadian broadcaster has responsibilities and needs to lead by example. I think going to a major American giant, Amazon, doesn't lead by example. I don't understand the decision. I understand the financial imperatives, but it's already hard for me to think that Two Point TV would make people pay, because this is content that should be accessible to all with our cultural content. Télé-Québec makes its content much more accessible, free to people, and Radio-Canada should do the same and not choose an American giant that doesn't collaborate much, and it should make its content free. If it's a public service, it should be free to the public as much as possible. Time is up. I'm sorry, Mr. Shampoo.
Il essaie de me pousser, Jacques.
He always tries to ask for more time.
You now have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you all. Kind of an interesting panel we have here today. I must say CBC's mandate was not answered when APTN was formed. I remember it in 1999, you coming on the air, because CBC did not fulfill their mandate. I just want to say to APTN, don't worry about numerous ratings. The president of CBC, when she was here, and I asked her ratings because I knew they were very poor, wouldn't give them, so don't worry about it. They only want to talk about it during the Olympic gold medal game that 13 million Canadians watched. So don't worry about the ratings, because our national public broadcaster could give a damn about the ratings only when it's in their favor. So it's interesting, guys, because I've been a broadcaster for over 40 years. C-18, brought by the Liberal government, was supposed to be the answer to broadcasting. So let me ask you a couple of questions. It was supposed to give funds to small players, local voices. Has any of you received any money out of C-18? I'm going to start with AMI, because I'm old. I remember I got called out on closed captioning. I ad-libbed a lot of my sportscasts, and I got called out by the CRTC for not closed captioning when it first came in. So, David, thank you. You started this in 2009. I got called out shortly after. But have you got any of the funding for C-18 that was supposed to go to this group of panels that we're seeing here today? Yeah, go ahead.
We have not received any C-18 funding. That being said, we have had to make substantial changes to the way we operate at AMI. We had a daily morning live show called AMI Today. We had a host, and we would talk about disability issues across the country. That was a live show that we produced in-house. We had to cancel that show 2 years ago and lay off almost 35 people because we could no longer afford to sustain that programming. So now we've moved to an outsourced programming model where all of our content is produced by third-party production companies. We've had to scale down our in-house production. So it's meaningful, and things are happening, and changes are being made, and hard decisions being made that are not fun and not allowing us to reach the mandate that you licensed us for in 2018, or the CRTC, or 2009 that the CRTC licensed us for.
Yeah, there's the other issue is the CRTC. They're not listening. They're not listening to you guys when you come there. And now you're $4 million short, and you're cutting programs because of it.
Yeah, we're $4.4 million short for 2018, our high. Cable subscribers are declining at a rate of 5%, up from 2.5%, which they were now this year. That represents about a $1.4 million loss of revenue for us per year. And if things don't change in 3 years from now, we will not be sustainable.
Well, you're the same as APTN. They used to get 35 cents per person when it's cable. They're up to 38, a whole 3 cents. So, Cheryl, I want you to talk about it because your budget has decreased. You, at one time, I think, were around 11 million. Now you're down to 8. And you've added a newscast. Now you've got 2 local newscasts a day. So you're doing more with less. But eventually, that catches up. And maybe it has already.
We are beneficiaries of the Online News Act. We do, there is a fund dedicated for Indigenous publishers and broadcasters. As you know, it definitely will help in the short term. We know how volatile that piece of legislation is for the future. I hope it stays because it definitely is helping to be transparent. I'm also on the board of the CJC. I was elected in a by-election. I didn't put my name up at first, but when there was a by-election, I knew I had to step forward and put my name forward. And after I was involved, a seat in the executive committee opened up, and I was asked if I could serve for the executive committee, and it was accepted by the group, which is a really great group of people, really smart group of people. So I do have some inside knowledge of how that's going.
Congratulations on your appointment, by the way. I want to go to ethnic media. It's a growing media. But I also had agreed when I saw the footage from the City of Toronto rally were well over 100,000. We've never had anything like this in Canada in my time of broadcasting. You said you hit 150,000. I watched the news that day, maybe a minute maximum on CTV, Bell Media, a little bit on CBC. It's frustrating because I thought when we got into C18, small players, local voices. So when you have over 100,000 take to the streets in our largest city in this country, and there was no balance in media whatsoever. So I just want you to talk about that because I think ethnic media has received little or no funding, and it's disturbing when I do see and hear these stories not being told after C18 was passed.
Maybe a quick response. We are out of time.
If you followed the 2 weeks after that, we had, according to Toronto Police, 500,000 people rallied. And yes, as I opened in my opening remark, as an independent producer, CIMA, we have not received even $1. I operated 33 years without, except the emergency funding during COVID, I have not received even 1 penny from any level of government.
Thank you. Mr. Miles, you now have the floor for 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you very much. This is a great panel, and thank you, Madam Chair. Many of the challenges we're facing here in this sector is because we're moving from traditional broadcasting to digital platforms. And digital platforms aren't monetized in the same way. So it seems to be that's across the board. Now we're trying to catch up with this new reality. One of the questions I have is, not only as we move to digital platforms, Madame Carignan, elle a parlé de ça aussi.
Ms. Carignan spoke about this as well.
The problem of digital platforms respond differently than traditional broadcasting in terms of how they perform, how they react. I think peut-être on va commencer avec Madame Carignan.
Perhaps we can begin with Ms. Carignan because I'd like to know, one of the challenges is that digital platforms prefer more extreme perspectives. It works well. There's more engagement if there's an extreme view, but if it's more journalistic, which respects journalistic practices, it's too boring. It's too balanced for the algorithm. So how will journalism survive in this world? Because I think now there's opinion and journalism there's a lack of distinction because digital platforms prefer opinion. Is this true? And how can we have journalism in a digital world today? Thank you for the question. I think a large part of the rise of opinion is that it doesn't cost much to produce. It attracts attention. There's the financial component, so it's very popular to produce opinion. Major platforms say they don't need news, that people don't go to them for news. It's hard to contradict because we don't have access to their private data, but a number of people look to digital platforms for news. A lot of people left Facebook after they stopped publishing news. People say that content on Facebook now is superficial. There's an appetite for news that can be hidden because it's not profitable, but the algorithms are looking to keep people on the platforms as long as possible, and that works through indignation, rage, humor, what keeps people engaged, and that's a problem. We see in the United States, there's the trial on how platforms were designed and the negative effect on youth, and there's radicalization and violence. We need to take a step back and see that people have an appetite for news and information, and that shouldn't just be based on ratings, but on the public's interest in having relevant information to make informed decision. And that's where we can confuse what people need and what they're curious about. Those are two totally different things. We need to offer people what they need, and that needs to be exposed. We need to foster discoverability of content, and people have an appetite for that. In different research, like from the University of Laval, people have turned to downloading platforms and applications from media since the media blockage. People just need to know how to access.
Merci.
Thank you.
APTN, you can speak to that as well. Just obviously, you're trying to be where eyeballs are, and we know that eyeballs are at those digital platforms. But how do you maintain the journalistic standards and procedures and integrity in a world where sometimes the more extreme views are the ones that get the most views and get the most interaction and are favored by the platform itself?
Yes, absolutely. You know, I talked earlier about how we have a longer form journalism than most other media outlets. So we know now, absolutely people are not watching those traditional newscasts as much as they used to. So we definitely chop up little stories into bite-sized pieces and put them out there according to what we feel is true to that story, what we feel are viewpoints that are not being heard, to go out on those mediums and share them. The online hate that comes from those short little snippets, and then so many of them, and then so many people commenting, including bots. We know that research has come out saying that there's a real human effort in creating those bots that will target certain groups of the population in Canada and definitely bring everybody down. But it definitely does not speak to the true form of the kind of broadcasting that has to happen with Indigenous media, and what we've heard on the rest of the panel today, where Canadians need more of that context, they need more of that education, but that's definitely not where you can get a lot of it on the streaming video unless you have a really, really curated feed for yourself.
Thank you. Mr. Diot, you now have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just to give a bit of background, I was a journalist for 30 years. There are several around the table here. I worked in radio, TV, magazines, and newspapers. And back in the glory days, we would talk about, we were very, very opposed to taking any government money, right? Because a lot of people, I worked at a tabloid for most of my life, and we said, no, we want to be independent. We don't want to be undermined by looking like we're taking government money. Today, everybody wants it. But you also see online now where people will deride mainstream media saying, you're bought and paid for. What's the solution? Because obviously we don't want to see journalism disappear. I don't want to. I think we need more journalists, not fewer journalists, and I say that as a politician. But what is the solution? Maybe we could start with Mr. Rezvanov.
The solution, I could only talk about my sector, and we are grassroots. Our work is not just a work, it's our passion. It's a passion for our culture, passion and our commitment to our community. The reason I spoke, obviously as a media person, I'm recognized in the community. There's a responsibility on me. And so every conduct I do, it has to be questionable. So I have to make sure that I'm going to be scrutinized, first by myself, then my community. So come back to that. In that level, I would like to say that for us to come to this level, we don't want it to get money from the government. But advertising, the world has changed drastically, and it happened very quick, especially COVID make it faster. So for past 33 years, you might ask, where'd you get the money? So we were making, just like any other operation, we are small, extremely small. In fact, one-man show, maybe a couple of freelancers. I'm a producer, I'm a director, I'm a content producer, I'm a marketing executive, and I have to do all this stuff by myself. Why? I could have go get a fun job for CBC, but that's not what I'm looking for. I want to commit. I want to basically have a job that I can vouch for it. So for that matter, I would like to say that now becoming a matter of survival to come and to look at the authentic and legitimate source of funding, which is the government.
If I may add, if I might add, the independent ethnic producer segment is the only segment that does not have accessibility in a world where so many media entities are getting some kind of support. We do not fit into the system because of what the definition of an independent ethnic producer is. We cannot access any of the media funds. We've met with all of them. We've been lobbying for years and years. The Google Fund, we cannot because the very nature of the independent ethnic producer, they don't have a staff of paid journalists. The Canadian Media Fund, we've met with several times, also do not fit those categories, and others. So I think it's important for us because we are a distinct category to be able to have accessibility somewhere in the structure. It's a critical time now for expression for journalism, and it's a critical time to educate audiences who are not comfortable in either French or English.
Just open it up to others. How do we strike that balance? Because, again, we want media to survive, but we don't want people to think that you're bought and paid for. Anybody care to figure out the best way to do that?
I don't know about the best way, but a way is probably several ways. One way is the tax credit, the Canadian Journalism Tax Credit, which goes to print publications, digital publications, but broadcasters are excluded from accessing that tax credit. That is a neutral, strictly neutral, CRA-administered, you spend the money, you get a tax credit tool. So that's about as neutral as you can get. There's no decision-making involved in that. You either spend the money and qualify or you don't. So that's an example of a mechanism that is not. I mean, it's as clean as from interference as you could imagine. Beyond that, something like the Services of Exceptional Importance Fund that we've talked about, that would be a CRTC tool. The way that functions is that's at a step removed from government, or at least probably 2 steps removed from government. It's a fund that's contributed to by streamers in this case, and then the monies would be allocated independently of government to certain designated entities because of the public mandate that they fulfill. So that's another example of a double arm's length funding mechanism, and there's probably many more that could be designed in that kind of model. And I'm sitting beside the professor here who probably has some ideas of her own.
Yeah, Madame Carignan.
If you allow me to answer in French, thank you for the question. En effet, je pense qu'il
I think we need to think of a number of different sources of funding.
We don't have the choice to have that kind of public money to help the media. Je pense que c'est vraiment important de continuer le financement public.
I think it's important to continue the public funding. There's not much choice. If media are a public good, they need to be funded at all levels to serve different populations. You've talked about mistrust that people will have if they know that there's public funding. Well, we need to think about how could we have media education programs to explain how journalistic practices work, and maybe have institutions that promote the independence of journalism and standards. The Quebec Press Council, for example, now has major financial problems. Some are no longer members. What happens when media do not participate in the body that is supposed to promote journalistic standards? Now there's the Canadian News Council that has been weakened. I think we need to strengthen those mechanisms to show the independence of media and provide them the financial means to continue. And it needs to be based not on projects, but on the functioning and the operation of media. I think other media could speak to this, but in our research on Indigenous media in Quebec, they told us we can't have project-based funding. We don't have the time to ask every time. We need to have ongoing funding, but we can fund constructive initiatives for the media. So if there are platforms that are created where all community media or local media could put their content together, maybe more people would look at those platforms because there would be more content offered, more visibility, and perhaps a better media leverage to obtain advertising. So this would be structural and could be funded by the government and would allow media to work together to strengthen their structure to be more discoverable and a greater capacity to negotiate with advertisers.
Thank you. Merci. Mr. Miles, you have 5 minutes.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. And that's a great question, Carrie, and MP Diot, because I was thinking the same thing. I mean, we're talking about mistrust. I would argue that it goes as far as also involving people's relationship to private advertising money as well. I would say the distrust across the board has been not just if people get public money, but if they get money from advertising as well, or from big business or whatever. Let's be honest here, mistrust goes across the board. And as soon as people feel like there's any financing coming from outside, they feel like it's affecting the journalism, whether it be from advertising or from public money. So it makes me wonder how much we need to take a step back and talk about the profession of journalism. I know we talked about education and media, but I would like to hear your perspective on, again, how many people understand what journalistic standards and procedures are? What does that look like? What does it look like to have an ombudsman at a paper or at a radio station or, at a media organization? What does accountability to an audience look like? Because now it looks like it only is accountable if there's no private financing, if there's no government. That creates a world in which organizations can't build or grow and deliver actually reputable, journalistic news sources to people. So I guess perhaps maybe we'll start with David and Kevin, if that's okay. I'd just be curious to know your thoughts. We can go across, but I'd be curious to know about the thoughts of how do we educate the population in ways to understand the new media landscape and what it looks like and what journalism looks like as a profession. Thank you.
Sure. AMI is a little bit different than APTN and the different organizations because we're not a news organization. We're a niche service who wants to put positive portrayal over persons with disabilities and create content that is reflective of their stories and puts them in the media. That being said, I think I'll keep it short, but from our perspective, I think it's really, really important that all Canadian perspectives are represented within journalism. So it could be a perspective from, we have a show on our audio service where David Lepofsky is one of our hosts. So he's talking about news and information from a journalistic perspective from that of a person with a disability who's blind and partially sighted. I think from the same stories that Cheryl was talking about, from APTN's perspective, it's important that voices from the Indigenous programming, Indigenous voices are heard with respect to news. I will leave it at that because that's kind of what we're about. I'll let the organizations who actually have news teams and news services and whatnot speak to the authenticity of journalism, but I'll throw it to you. That's my role to do that, but go ahead.
From Mrs. McKenzie, thank you.
The demands of daily journalism and going to air, like we were talking about, we broadcast twice a day our newscasts. Like, whether we're ready or not, that TV screen's going to go black, unless we're up on the air. So there's lots of demands on our time, but There has been in the smaller Indigenous news outlets where they talk about going out to communities and consulting with them and talking about, well, what kind of stories do you want to have? Give us your pitches. What do you think of our coverage? We have done some of that in focus groups, but it's very hard to find the time and resources to do that when we're struggling to go to air every day and keep that screen from going black.
Peut-être, je peux que demander ça à Mme Carignan.
A question for Madame Carignan. Do you think Canadians understand what journalism is as a profession? There is a lack of understanding among Canadians as to what journalism is as a profession. As I was saying earlier, even journalists themselves sometimes have a hard time knowing if they're journalists. Columnists have said they're not journalists because they're columnists, but they're opinion journalists. For the public, just imagine, it's very complicated to understand, especially when influencers say they're journalists, and then others who comment on the news say they're not journalists. In Quebec, there are many influencers now who explain things. They don't claim to be journalists, but people have a hard time, and the media has a responsibility as well. A year ago, journalists were talking about how to regain public trust, and I said, you need to explain your practices. In your reporting, in your writing, we could benefit from seeing how you obtained information, who you talked to. So educate through information so people can understand. And I think media being close to people, it's important to build that trust. So to be present in communities, to have events, it's not always easy, but it's important. And you were talking about ombudsmen and self-regulatory bodies. I see it when I teach. There are communication students who are interested in journalism. And at the first class, I say, what would the ombuds do, or what's a press council? They don't know what it is. So if you don't know the organization exists, you can't make a complaint, for example, and it doesn't build trust if you don't understand the mechanisms. So there's a lack of understanding of those mechanisms. We need to make them better known. And it would be good to adopt strong practices, but there's a lack of understanding now.
Merci.
Thank you. Next.
Je donne la parole.
I give the floor to Mr. Champoux. Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Carignan, in your opening statement, you referred to a study on Indigenous media you participated in and you produced with the Quebec Ministry of Communications and Culture. Is that report available somewhere? Are you able to provide it to the committee so we can have a look at it? Because I think it's very relevant to what we've heard today. It's a report that's not publicly available. It was provided to the Quebec Ministry, but the Ministry authorized me to share it if it were requested. And so I don't think there will be any objection to me sharing it with the committee. It will be my pleasure to do so. It talks about the representation of those media outlets, their experience, with some limits because it was during the pandemic. It was still very difficult to go on the ground and obtain all information, but it shows issues that have been covered by my colleagues today very well. Be very interesting for the committee to have access to it. It's public now. Mathieu Lacombe must be listening, so he can authorize that. I want to pick up on our conversation earlier. We talked about the decision by Radio-Canada to offer its content on Prime. And with the time we had, we weren't able to go very fully into the discussion. And I want to add the fact that the question of funding of the public broadcaster often comes up. And I know there are plans to look at the mandate, what we expect from the broadcaster, but also the funding model. In your view, is that where the solution would be found? I'm not talking about discoverability and having it on Prime, but regarding advertising, competition with other media, the availability of that advertising, other media could benefit from it if in the funding model those fees or those sources of revenue were taken away from Radio-Canada. Do you have an opinion on the funding model that we should put in place for CBC Radio-Canada? I don't think it's by taking away from Radio-Canada that we will solve things for other media. I think we need to find other sources, other solutions because Radio-Canada doesn't have its pockets full of money. There are a lot of cuts. We need to find other ways of proceeding. We can ask about the amounts that go to Radio-Canada from the digital initiatives. I'm not saying we shouldn't review things and some types of publicity. The question of Amazon is clearly problematic, but I think we need to develop other initiatives to help media, community media, official language, minority community media, regional media. We need to have recurring funding and to develop technological solutions to share information, tax credits for resources. So I don't think we should cut from one side. I think we need to find creative solutions for others. Okay, we're talking about assisting media, and I'm going to make the connection with Radio-Canada, but I think we should take CBC Radio-Canada's funding and put it further from the government. It's okay that it's public money, but it should be at arm's length from the government to have it more independent from influence in the public's view. And support for the media. We heard comments around the table today. People feel that if they accept government funding, they're accountable. They need to maybe censor themselves or be cautious in the coverage they offer on government matters to please the government, to not lose their subsidy. Would there be a way to put in place efficient government support for media in general, but to not have that perception of influence over media coverage? Yes, there are many reports that were prepared by committees that have looked about the future of the media. There was the Payette report in Quebec that put forward the idea that an independent body that manages funding for media, but also is an observer and reports on problems in the media, and there would be that social accountability, and that could be publicly discussed, which press councils don't do now. They just receive complaints. So to have an independent body that manages money but also raises problems would increase trust, and that was pointed out in a number of reports, like the Payette Commission, but others as well. It's important to have an independent body that shows that the government won't interfere in the media, that would have the public's trust and would allow the media to have more trust in public funding. I would invite you to look at those solutions, which were often forgotten, put on the shelf, but were interesting. I just have 3 minutes left.
Oh, intéressant et très important.
Interesting and very important.
You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. I'm just going to return to my questions to the Ethnic Media Association. I feel like we got cut a little bit short. I just want to return back to news coverage around the situation in Iran, and of course also pertaining to the mass number of people who have come together in places like Toronto and other urban centers across this country in solidarity with the people of Iran who are contending for their freedom from an extremely hostile regime. That coverage within mainstream media, and in particular with regard to the CBC, has been extremely biased. And many members of the Iranian Canadian community feel that and are upset by it. And they have made that known. In your estimation, both as an Iranian, Canadian, and someone who is within the media landscape, why is it that such frustration, I guess, is growing among your community?
First of all, let me say, as a Canadian Iranian, because because it's a country I chose. The other one, I didn't have a choice. Well, if you go back, we are not here. Obviously, I went to school in the U.S. and then I ended up in Canada. We didn't come here for economic reason. We came here for political reason. I left that country 46 years ago and never been back. And the reason is that we came to Canada, and I'm going to say that we love this country, and it's our home. It is our home. Even if things changes over there, I won't go back. This is my home. And this is the same sentiment that basically shared by, I would say, 90% of the Iranians. So this is our country. Everything belongs to us. We work in here. We pay taxes, CBC, everything. So when it comes actually to be treated like Canadian, then all of a sudden we are not Canadian anymore, So that's what the frustration exists. If you follow the situation, the rallies you mentioned, I've been in touch with the mayors, police departments, everybody. They never seen anything like that in Canadian history. You have 570,000 people coming to the longest street in the world, and not even one incident, they even cleaned the streets, to make sure. Why? Because this is our home, this is our country. In return, we don't get any kind of media coverage or any kind of reaction. We got reaction from Premier. They said that you ever want to take a rally, take a page from the Iranian community. This is how they do it. Not even one incident in all major rallies that we had. So in return, we expect some kind of a response, tell our story. Last Sunday, I attended every one of them, by the way. Last Sunday in front of U.S. consulate, you should have been there. It's like everybody's American, everybody's Canadian, everybody's Persian. So come back to that. We expect that, a major media give us the coverage. After all, we belong to you and you belong to us, and that's why we're disappointed. Normally, we let it go. It is not the first time, by the way. Throughout the 46 years, it's been ignored. It's been ignored globally. This murder, whatever you think, the numbers are 30,000, 40,000, but actual number is 97,000 youth that are being massacred in 2 nights. 2 nights. And it still didn't stop because the continuation, like mass execution after that is been done with the people who were basically arrested. So that's why we want this story to get there. After all, we want international support, which we are getting it to some degree. And the whole globe understood after 46 years what we've been going through, what we have been going through. So then you expect from CBC and all these major headlines, tell us story, and not ignoring us.
But this, if I could just add, this is where the authenticity.
What is the danger when mainstream media doesn't tell the truth, when they don't report the story as it actually happens? What is the danger to your community?
The danger to the community has been this story hasn't been said for 46 years, and that government has been there. It's not like they were doing it first time for past 2 months. They've been doing it for past 46 years, but that news never got out in any way. CNN is another one of them. They totally, in fact, now people are questioning it. How come nobody can go to Iran except CNN? We don't have internet. How could CNN report from Iran? So these are the ones that we're living in an era that everybody's smart. Everybody can get their information. And you're talking about journalism. Everybody with a camera is a journalist now. So come back to that. Yes, it's for first time that the people are paying attention to what we've been going for past 46 years. That's why it becomes frustrating. That's why you expect your friends to tell you we are here to help you. And when they ignore you, this is the same thing what happened with CBC. Madeleine?
Well, I just wanted to add, this is where the authenticity of ethnic media comes in. And this is where it's very important to have that perspective to the various diverse communities in Canada. And we just want support in order to help us make our job of entrusting information to audiences who have information in their own language, to the ethnocultural communities in Canada. So this is why our role is very important, and this is why we're here to say we're a specific, distinct category, the independent ethnic producer base, and we would, like to have that support to do our job.
Thank you. Monsieur Toumba, je vous passe la parole.
Mr. Toumba, you have the floor. Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Omelas, I'll ask a question that will echo Bernard Généreur's question on the $100 million provided to the media, and some goes to Radio-Canada, and your answer was that you have a good relationship with CBC. Could you explain in a few words how the relationship has been built with CBC and Radio-Canada so that media can see how it's good to have those relationships?
Partnerships are incredibly important in the Canadian broadcasting landscape. We wouldn't be able to do what we do without having those strong partnerships, not only with CBC Radio-Canada, which helps us in the commissioning of certain content, but also with Bell Media and other organizations as well. The funding is not there to do scripted drama and the high quality, high caliber programming that we offer to our viewers. And that allows us, in turn, to do fulfill other parts of our mandate. For example, 62 commissions every single year. We do stories that really are unheard or would not be heard without our efforts. We've actually done a documentary in a language spoken at the time by fewer than 35 people, Tahltan. And that was the closing graphic on the screen. This is the first time the Tahltan language has ever been broadcast. It's spoken by fewer than 35 people. Why is that on a national network? Because our mission is so broad. We do stories for mainstream audiences, for Indigenous audiences, and for people whose stories have not been heard. And those partnerships are critical to helping us do that.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Mr. Rezvanifar, my sympathies regarding what's happening in Iran. I heard Ms. Thomas's question concerning the coverage of the rally that wasn't present in major media. She said that the media isn't telling the truth, but I heard from you that it wasn't covered. Is it not being covered? Well, they didn't cover your event. Can you give us a few words on that?
The question is not covered or is not telling the truth? Which one? I didn't get the question.
If there was no coverage, as you've said, and my colleague said the media didn't tell the truth, was the rally not covered, or did the media provide false information?
Good question. Thank you. In fact, it's a very good question. I would say both of them. There is two sides to what is happening in Iran. There's a pro-government and anti-government. The anti-government is us, and it's a whole world that is coming to with solidarity with us. In first part, the coverage did not receive the way it should have been received by major media. The second one is that it's kind of interesting because most of my colleagues, Canadian Iranians, are frustrated because the other side of the pro-government received more coverage than anti-government, And in fact, sometimes you listen to it and you go, well, how about the other side? I mean, I understand you need to balance it. Obviously, you're providing information. You leave it to your audience to understand what's going on. No, I would say probably 30%, 70%, 70% pro coverage, all this stuff, and the 30% is they have to, So that's what the credibility comes to the question. Is it biased or is it unbiased, And we have reached the reaction to demonstration in front of CBC would tell you what kind of conclusion they got.
Merci beaucoup. Madame.
Thank you very much. Ms. Carignan, we have YouTubers, commentators, journalists. Are we at the stage where we would say that we need to have a big meeting on the state of journalism? What is your view? I don't think it would be a bad idea to have a summit on media and to look for structures to face the crisis in media and crisis in trust in the ways that content is shared that's not journalism and creates confusion. Other panelists were talking about pooling resources, and I think it would be good. Investigative reporting has benefited recently by having different media outlets work together. So they've pooled their resources. They've taken journalists who know local situations and who can speak in different media of their experience, which might not be understood by journalists who don't have access to those communities. Those are winning solutions, and it would be good to take an opportunity to look at how to share resources and structures.
We will have one quick lightning round to finish off 2 minutes for each party. And Mr. Champoux?
Il est 10h03, Madame la.
It's 10:03. We started at 8:20, so I think we would have a little bit more than 2 minutes per group.
Normalement, il nous reste.
We should have about 16 or 17 minutes left.
Okay. Alors, si on donne...
Okay, if we give 5 minutes to each. Okay.
Which of you would like to take the 5 minutes?
Sorry, just coming back to ethnic media here, just to round out this conversation. One of the things that CIMA stated in a press release, they said, quote, independent third language producers are excluded from existing federal programs such as the Canadian Media Fund, Google News Fund, Local Journalism Initiative, and the Canadian Journalism Labor Tax Credit. Obviously, there has been an environment of exclusion created around media funding. The government has positioned itself to choose winners and losers in terms of who's in, who's out. And then, interestingly enough, not only in terms of who's in and who's out with regard to funding, but then also with regards to who's in and who's out in terms of who gets to ask the government questions, who gets access to the press gallery. When a government puts itself in that position, they ultimately then begin to influence the message that gets put out to the general public, which I believe is a very dangerous place to be, and I believe most of you on this panel would agree with that. The last thing we want is a state-run media. We want to keep it independent. We want journalists to have freedom to exercise their discretion and to be true to the story as it happened rather than taking a certain narrative or angle. CIMA is in an interesting place, of course, because these, third language initiatives are offering news from a place of wanting to tell the story in the language that is desired by those that are watching these different programs, and wanting to do so, I believe, with as little bias as possible. However, again, coming back to the fact that the government has put itself in a position where it is choosing winners and losers. And I'm wondering then how this inequality in terms of funding and government choice impacts the ability of Canadians, and in particular, ethnic Canadians, to access accurate information.
Well, thank you very much for the comments and that question. I think the fact that it's so important to bring forward ethnocultural perspective from a Canadian perspective. We have seasoned journalists who had experience internationally and now are here in Canada, like Q is, and we've often, the whole media landscape has changed in that, there is support for many entities. We have even offered with different government representatives to say, should there be a multilingual CBC? Should there be a multilingual TVO? So we've gone down every path, and we are the underdog. Everyone's here because they're passionate about democracy. They're passionate about reflecting community leadership that does not get airtime in traditional media. And the fact that, the CRTC hasn't looked at the ethnic policy, for example, since the early 1990s. We need our rightful place in the broadcasting system, and we need our rightful place to be able to express our perspectives, especially at a time when the world is so turbulent, and really to contribute to the dynamic of Canadian citizenry. So we are not, the broadcasting system recognizes independent production companies, broadcast entities, community radio stations, and but does not recognize the independent ethnic producer. And so this is not helping us or assisting us in contributing to Canadian events. The coverage is still very sparse at times, and the perspective that is allowed is sometimes stifled. And this is where our role is extremely important at these times. Q?
I would like to follow up. I think they have to understand the nature of what we produce. I have interviewed Prime Minister in my program. We have representatives of police departments. All level of governments have been guests on my program. Why we're doing it? Because we want to teach the newcomers, our community, to integrate. These are the people. I could put shows and everything from home. I'm not doing that. And I know my colleagues are doing the same thing too. We wanted to be the conduit between the federal government or the government and our community. And we've been doing it for the past 33 years, as I said, without any kind of funding. It's kind of interesting when the election comes, when there's certain major issue comes, they know what my telephone number is. They call me and ask for help. And we do that. And as soon as when we come in front of, as Madam mentioned, we have had over 50 Zoom calls for past 2 years with government officials. We even hired lobbyists. We got everything. Nothing happened. And interesting enough is that when we are in those Zoom, it seems like they just heard that from us for the first time. Well, you've been doing that? And some of them think that we're already getting funding. So we have to educate during all these 50 Zooms who we are, what we are doing, how long we've been doing that. And it's kind of sad because I heard and I read New York State in U.S. has a funding for the ethnic media. And they are melting pots. They are not a multicultural society. They even have a funding for their interlanguage programming. In here, it's kind of sad. In fact, somehow, it's kind of disappointing, you know.
Thank you. Mr. Al-Soud, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm spoiled for choice with this newfound time, and so I will try to ask questions to everyone. With my first question for Mr. Arrington and Mr. Goldstein, it's interesting because technological advancement, artificial intelligence, stepping into that space is often highlighted as a negative, particularly in this context. But I imagine that in your field, in your specific sector, there are actually significant opportunities with the use of artificial intelligence, with the use of technological advancements, in ensuring accessibility across a variety of spaces. I'd like to hear you speak on that, if possible.
Sure. We've looked at the use of AI with respect to description, with respect to captioning, and most recently with ASL and QSL. There's opportunity there. There's opportunity to do it at a quicker amount and make it more ubiquitous across platforms, and that's great. The one thing I will remind you that the different disability groups are really hesitant to adopt AI as a fix-all for everything. So QSL and ASL providers, they want to make sure there's a human element to it. Same thing with description. It can't just be an automatic thing. It's an automatic voice-over dubbing things. They want to make sure there's a human element to it. So I think it's a tool that can be used, but I don't think it's a fix-all for everything. There has to be some form of a human element in it. That's what the disability community is asking for.
You'll have to forgive me, maybe it's a slightly redundant question, but why is there that hesitancy with regards to the human element?
I think they want. I think that from the mechanics of description, they want to make sure that the content flows. It's not just it's an art form. It's not just you're not just reading a newspaper article to them. If you're describing a movie or whatever it could be. I think from an ASL and QSL standpoint, it's a culture. It's a language for them, so they want to make sure the nuances in that language are captured. And I don't know if AI does that as of yet. It could in the future, but we're looking at all this. We're looking at making the way to turn content quicker, but at the same time respect the needs of the community.
Fantastic, thank you. Taking a slight shift in terms of the question, do you find that as news consumption increasingly begins to shift towards digital platforms, that accessibility standards are keeping pace with the technological change?
No. Well, yes and no. How's that sound? I think from a broadcasting standpoint, like a linear service, Canada leads the world. I think from major platforms like YouTube, I think they've come a long way and with respect to adding description and captioning and things like that to their content. But it still has lots of work to do. So without the regulatory, without an organization like us we put standards in place. We've done that for the Canadian broadcasting system. We'd be more than happy to do that for digital platforms across Canada to make sure that it's not left behind, it doesn't lag. As we transition from linear services to digital services, it's important that accessibility and the standards that along with it are also part of it. So it's a work in progress.
Perfect, thank you, Mr. Arrington. Madame Carignan, j'aimerais...
Ms. Carignan, I'd like to pick up on your conversation with Mr. Champoux earlier. It covered a number of interesting points. Underqualified or part-time journalism, the rise of opinion pieces, the lack of engagement in good faith journalism, but we see reluctance in regards to government intervention. So how can we help without affecting journalistic independence? I'm thinking of your example of an independent agent that would distribute funds. Thank you for the question. I think it would be good to look at an external body that could distribute funds, which would also be an observatory, would identify problems in media, could advise media and help them improve their practices. When I was at the Quebec Press Council, journalists would call because they wondered what to do, how to react in certain situations. They didn't have they didn't always have the resources to do so. So that type of initiative could be a good option. In the media themselves, there need to be structures, there need to be journalistic practices, and a clear structure with an independence between managers and journalists to ensure journalistic independence. That's a really important structure that needs to be explained to the public. Now there's a lot of confusion. We did a study on native advertising with one of our teams. We see it's a practice that's put in place to solve certain financial issues. So there are sponsored content from private interests, and that increases mistrust. There's a lack of separation between journalists and editorial people. We need to avoid those practices. Thank you very much, Madame Carignan.
I represent the beautiful riding of Mississauga Centre. It is one of the most diverse in the country. And ethnic and community media outlets are among the primary sources of news and information languages other than in English and French. What happens in your experience, Mr. Rizvanifar, when newcomers, for instance, don't have reliable access to ethnic media? I think of things like civic engagement or opportunity finding.
Quick answer, please. We're out of time.
Yes. What happens to them? They're lost. They're lost. As a matter of fact, I used to live in Mississauga when I came moved from U.S. to here. They're lost, and in fact, it's kind of even I have to go. I could go on that one because I've seen a lot of incidents like that. They call us. They help. They ask for help. They ask, and they're like they don't have anybody, especially if they're refugees. You know, they have nobody in here. So we are the only. We have become the ears and eyes. You know, and bear in mind, some of them coming here and they get into trouble. They don't know things. We have helped people who basically been in the hospital. Through my program, we help them. We put them in touch with the government officials. We put them with the government bodies to help them. Because during that period of time, you know, immigration is not an easy task.
Thank you. Et Monsieur Champoux, je vous passe la parole.
Mr. Champoux, 5 minutes for you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I thank the witnesses. It was a very interesting meeting once again today. Madame Carignan, you talked about the Online News Act earlier at the beginning of the meeting. You talked about that act. It's important and should even be strengthened. I share your view. It should be strengthened, maybe perfected as well. On the other hand, there are voices calling for us to work with Meta to have news on their platform again. Many influencers need those platforms to promote their content, but also regional media, weeklies who put their content there, who reached a lot of people thanks to those platforms. Maybe we're a little bit less rigid than some players in these media and news sectors. But do you think there's a need to reopen those discussions, maybe make compromises to allow different voices to be heard a little bit more broadly on Meta's platforms? I think it's necessary to reopen that discussion with Meta, the other big platforms. We need to look at platforms that are becoming more prominent online, and those others might need to be met with as well to hold them accountable and see how they can collaborate. The conversation needs to be open with Meta. I think they may have lost Canadians. It might be a good time to discuss with them. But regional and community media have been the most affected by these cuts because they couldn't turn as easily to creating an application and to draw people to their own platform. So that's why I was talking about pooling resources. Maybe different smaller media could work together because they don't have the same means as bigger media, which were able to create their own structure and apps. And now they're able to create their own AI, but others have a hard time keeping their journalism going. Let's talk about AI because it's the elephant in the room. AI is fueled by content, and it's like a double-edged sword. If we decide to not allow content to be used to fuel AI, then some, for Francophone culture and Francophone media, might drown in the North American Anglophone Ocean. It's also likely one of the motivations that Meta would have to put journalistic content back online, because then they could fuel their AI tools with that. I know it's fantastic technology. I know there's no avoiding it. I know it will be useful in many ways. I know it will facilitate life, but it will also create a lot of ethical problems and questions which we're not familiar with yet. How should we move forward? What should we do now in journalism? Because that's what we're talking about today. What role should AI have, especially when regions are poorly served because there's a lack of journalists and there's the disappearance of media in the regions? So what role could we have now for AI as a tool for journalistic coverage?
En effet,
In fact, we'll have to turn to AI. We won't be going backward, it's clear. I heard David mention that there needed to be human intervention. Journalistic practices have started to integrate AI in their codes. So if it's used, it needs to be said, it needs to be transparent, and there should be human verification because those tools have biases, cultural biases, and for programming as well. They have hallucinations and mistakes. So journalistic work needs to be fundamentally human. There needs to be a verification. We shouldn't let a machine with foreign interests control our content. AI won't give the same results if it was programmed in China or in the US, so there are significant cultural biases. And now we see that many media are integrating it. Those media outlets sometimes try to develop their own AI. They need to have the means. That could be a solution, but then is it again the biggest players who will have an advantage? That's one of my fears. We need to look at pooling resources, and then there's intellectual property and culture and journalism, and maybe the discussion with the major platforms should be broadened to AI, of course. That is the case. The biggest players always have first access to new technologies, which would further weaken the smaller players, and I see Mr. Omelis nodding his head. I think it's always been that way. It's always the responsibility, I think, of society and different bodies to protect those smaller players, to have adequate coverage of the news. Madam Chair, do I have time left? I still had 5 or 6 other good questions. Thank you to all of our witnesses.
Everyone for participating. If there's something you forgot to say or something you think about later, or you have documents that have been requested by members or other documents you think we should see, please send them to our committee via our clerk. We'll be able to all read that information and incorporate it into our study at the end of this. Study. You are excused. I would just like to ask members quickly if we all agree we can add at least one more meeting to this study, because there are so many witnesses who would like to testify. I think it behooves us to just add at least one more meeting at this point so that we can include those voices. Is everyone okay with that? You're good? All right. Thank you very much. Meeting adjourned.